what we're going to do is we'll pretty much walk around with the photographs and kind of be where the photograph was taken from. So you can see what it looked like way back then, 100 years ago, and what you see today, which there's not much left up here. The granite still survives, but there's no machinery. The buildings are all gone. Some remnants of the foundations I'll point out that you can possibly see, but it does take a lot of interpretation. That's why we do these walking tours, in order to see what you're looking at, you know. So here we are, we're in the parking lot, we get group assembly. The tour is going to cover some of the history of the two famous Quincy quarries. The Granite Railway Quarry, or Pine Hill Quarry, it was one of the first in Quincy. That's over that side. That one was opened in 1830 and it closed around 1942. And the Jonathan S. Swingle Quarry, which is on this side, was famous for its extra dark granite. It was the last quarry to operate in Quincy and it closed in 1963 from that accident I explained. So this photo you're looking at is from the Thomas Crane Public Library. This one was by R.W. Plummer, and it's dated around 1916, and it shows the first powerhouse at Swingles that was located in this parking lot area here. Right, so now we'll move on. We're going to walk up here, up to the steps, and we're going to stop at the top platform up there, and we'll talk a little bit more. Okay. So, where we're standing here is the top of the stairs. There would have been a blacksmith shop up here near this fence. So this area once had several buildings on it. As you can see from some of the foundation remains, you can barely see them, but there's some foundation remains here. And then over there in the ground, you can probably see remnants of a little bit of cement. You have to really look close. And even if you were like looking on the ground, I bet you I could pick up a piece of slag from the blacksmith shop. I know there's some around here. If somebody looks on the ground and they see a little piece of, it looks like coal, but it's like slag. So you would have had blacksmith shops up here. The blacksmiths were essential in the quarry industry. This is a picture of the inside of one of the blacksmith shops. And they would be, not a very good picture, by the way, but it's the only one I could find. Before the introduction of carbide tip tools, the blacksmiths were essential in this industry. And wedges, drills, other tools were made and repaired by the blacksmith. The early drills needed to be resharpened and tempered to hold an edge when working the hard Quincy granite. It was hard because it contained 30% quartz, okay? It had granite, Quincy granite was 30% quartz, 60% feldspar, 10% hornblende. It was the quartz that was the hard mineral. Quartz is very, very hard. And that's what gave Quincy this beautiful polish. When they polished it, was the quartz. Their color was because of some of the quartz was what they called smoky quartz inclusions in it when it was being formed 400 million years ago and way down and below us. In 1900, one blacksmith could take care of a gang of 13 men using just hand tools. But when pneumatic surfacing tools came into use, pneumatic we mean power tools, air-powered tools, the union deemed that each air-powered tool was equal to 5 men because the blacksmiths couldn't keep up with this. You know, they could keep up with them when they're using hand tools, but when they started using the pneumatic tools, they could work much, much faster. And the next thing you know, all these tools are showing up at the blacksmith shop. Hey, these things are dull. The guys just couldn't keep up with it, so the union said, well, one air-powered tool is equal to 5 guys using hand tools, basically. So drill steel contained 1% carbon. If it lost this, it would become soft and quickly dull. A good blacksmith knew how long to heat the steel and what type of bath to quench it in to use it to cool it. The blacksmith would make a dolly, they called it, or a female die in the shape of the drill bit. So he would take it, he would heat the dull drill up, cherry red, and then he would have it in the vise facing this way. Then he would use this dolly that was in the shape of the drill bit, and he'd put it onto the red hot steel and hammer it, and that would reshape the drill bit so that it would be a proper shape. Then of course it had to be, the drill needed to be reheated and cooled several times to temper it, and to the right temperature to retemper it so that it wasn't soft. So the first time they tried to drill a hole with it, it went dull. Blacksmithing today is still an art and a skill. There's a television show that's on the Bladesmith or something, and you see him making knives on TV. I don't know what channel it's on, History Channel or something. And you see these guys making knives, and then they have to take the knife and they put it through all these tests of chopping coconuts and whatever. And you see some of these guys, they just don't have it right for tempering it, and the blade will chip or crack or break. Well, the tools were the same way, working with granite. So a good blacksmith was well worth what they paid him. The drill then needed to be heated and cooled several times properly to retemper it. The blacksmith shop was kept dark, and that's why you see this picture like this. The reason being, so the blacksmiths could see the color of the tools, because they could tell by the color of the metal, you know, if it was dull red or cherry red or white hot, they could tell by the color, you know, how much temper or whatever they were putting back into the steel. So it was all about a matter of like color and timing and all that. So as we walk around the quarry, you might notice some old drill bits that are left in the ledge, and there are some up here. I'll point them out. And when they were worn out, they would take some of these old drill bits and they hammer them into a hole, and they would use those to tie off the ladders and the hoses for the pumps that went down into the quarry.
So they got the shape.
Yep.
They didn't have to further hone it, sharpen it?
Well, they would do that too. That's a good question, because they would get the shape and then they would retemper it. And then they also had grinding machines, you know, where they would grind it, and that was all part of the process. Later on, when they had carbide, which is used today, carbide is very hard material, and they make the drill bits, and then they have carbide tips, or carbide inserts they put in there, and carbide's very hard and it lasts a lot longer. And I think there's still a way to sharpen the carbide, but most of the times the carbide will last so long, and then they just get a new tool. And that might be a piece of slag. Let me see. Oh, that's a piece of coal. So that's a piece of coal that's left over from the blacksmith. Yeah, that's a piece of slag. Very good. Yeah, you can pass them around. So this is a piece of slag from the blacksmith shop.
And what is slag?
This came from
Slag
you, I
is
think.
when you're working the metal and they're using the coke, and basically it's burnt out coke and you know, any metal inclusions that were in the forge. So that would have come from the forge. And then, you know, there was tons of the stuff here because, you know, they'd be just dumping it all over the place, and it's scattered all over. So some of it still survived. Here's a piece of coal that would have been used in the blacksmith shop, and you have to take these home with you for school, right? That's a piece of coal. And those, like I said, there were shops up here. We'll move over here. We'll keep it going. What you're looking at here is a picture that was taken from that direction, looking up there. And what you see is, you see this little house that's there?
Yeah.
You see that flat platform up there?
Yeah.
Right up there? Okay, well that flat platform held a winch from one of the derricks. And it wasn't this derrick, it was this derrick here. There's a derrick here. And where I'm standing is this derrick. It's not the best picture, but where I'm standing, there was a derrick here. And the derrick is like a big crane that overlooked the quarry to pick up the blocks of granite. So up the top there, like I said, the wooden house would have covered the winch that was up there, mounted up there. Anybody that comes up here on their own, anytime you want, we're not going to go up there, but if you come up here on your own, you're welcome to go up there and walk around. Very slippery, be very careful, but there's other things you can see up there. We're not going to go up there. So what I'm standing on here, this stuff we see a granite base for one of the last derricks, and this is granite. This was one of the last derricks that was used at the Granite Railway Quarry. In the photo, you can see the derrick on this base in 1926. That's this one here, on this side. So this picture was taken in 1926. To your left, you can see another derrick in a choice house, which I pointed out, which is up, would have been up there on the top up there. By the way, they called that area, the swimmers would call that tabletop or rooftop up there, because it kind of looked like a table. It was crooked though. Derricks were mounted on a variety of bases. Some were just large, rough granite blocks, and others were cast steel. As you can see, this one was from a sawn piece of Quincy granite. You can see the saw marks in it. And the Granite Railway Company actually had a saw, a granite cutting saw that was located down the bottom of the incline, which we're going to go to afterwards. These quarry derricks stood 100 feet tall and were 36 inches square. Look at the base of this derrick. This is actually the base of it here. You can see it was almost this big. It was 36 inches by 36 inches. Actually, it was bigger because it would have been mounted on a swing. There would have been a swing here for it so they could swing it around. You'll see an example of derrick parts later in the tour. So these derricks were capable of lifting up to 30 tons. The mast, which was the part that stood upright, that's the mast. At the very top of it, it had a cap on it, and there were 6 wire ropes called guy wires, and the guy wires went off to different places to hold it up. That's these dead men that I talk about, that they're all around the quarry where they would have held the derricks up. We'll see an example of the derrick parts later on the tour, down below there afterwards. the best sticks, they call them, or wooden master boom, were Oregon spruce. Sometimes the guy wire would snap on these derricks under a heavy load, and the entire derrick and its load would fall back into the quarry. This end of the Granite Railway Quarry, on this end here, this end here was the last area to be quarried by the Granite Railway Company, and right down there would have been over 200 feet deep. They probably stopped quarrying here, like I said, in the late 1930s, 1937, maybe 1939. We're going to try to walk over there to get a better view, and it's a little narrow path, so we're going to be very careful going over there. On the other side over there was the quarry that had that extra dark granite. That was the gold they were after. The color of the granite would change from one end of the quarry to the other. You see Quincy granite, some of it's very light and some of it's very dark. And some of it's a little reddish, some of it has a little green in it. But I mean, the color will change from this quarry to the other. Now, the other, okay. It goes down to the summer trees.
Really?
Yeah. The granite was formed 400 million years ago. And what happened as the plates, I'm not the geologist, we do have a geologist that's a member of the museum, he explains this much better than me, and maybe somebody here can help me out that knows geology better than me. But as the plates on the earth were colliding or separating, and I think in this area here, as they pulled apart and the continents separated, when it pulled apart, it opened up this area where this molten mass that was formed with all these minerals, like a big soupy, gooey mixture, was able to find its way up through the Earth's crust and form what they call plutons. And you have these huge granite outcroppings. And when you're looking at this quarry, and when we get down there, I'll explain a little bit more. You have to remember that when they came up here in the 1830s, what they were looking at was just this big, huge piece of granite. There was probably some overburden with trees like this and dirt growing on it, but there was enough of the granite that was exposed from erosion and from the weather that they said, wow, there's a big piece of granite here. And there was, because it went straight across here. It was even higher than that if you look at topographical maps from earlier. This quarry possibly was another 50 or 60 feet higher than tabletop in some spots. And then it sloped down, because on the other side over there, there's evidence of where the glacier moved through. There's scratches in the earth. And then on the other side, see where that tower is? Not quite as far as where the little tower. See the little tower with the antennas on it, not the tall one? Yeah. But over in that area there, but closer to us, you can't see it from here. When we get down there, I can point it out better. There's actually evidence up here where the glacier moved through. So we know that would have been the height, and that would have been the height, but in the middle, there was an enormous amount of glacier. Now the picture behind us is very interesting. I'll step down so I can point this out. Now remember, this was a derrick. So for every one of these derricks, and this is an actual picture of one of the hoisting engines. I don't know which one it was, but there was several of these derricks and hoisting engines around this quarry. So this photo shows one of the several steam-powered hoisting engines that the Granite Railway Company used at the quarry. This is a 2-drum hoisting engine. One drum was used to raise and lower the boom on the derrick, and the other one controlled the fall block, or what you might know as a hook or a block that would lift the granite out. The engines were later run by compressed air after the Granite Railway Company built their own central air plant, which we will visit at the bottom of the incline. On the fence behind us over there, I'll show you where one of the hoisting engines was. As I said, there was one up there that was in a house. And then there's one here that's buried in the woods. You can just see the stuff sticking up over here. I won't go too far in. It might be still behind you, but there's a cement pad, and that's where one of these winches, or they call them hoisting engines and winches, that would have been located, and the cable would have went over there to that derrick to control that. And now on the fence behind us, this is a great picture. If you look at this.
I know, these women.
I was waiting for somebody to point that out. Are you sure you haven't been on the tour before? Because those are pinups.
Yeah.
These guys here, you know, these are the guys in here. They would have been Swedes and they would have been Welsh. You know, those are the ones that ran these things. English and Scotsmen. You know, they were the engineers. They were hoisting engineers at the time. And there's probably, I don't know. I have to look at the picture. I know there's 1, 2, 3. At least 3 guys in there. Maybe there's somebody else. But there's pinups. They're pinup girls they would put on the walls. At one time, these derricks were left out in the open
I kind of like this because my profession was a steam engineer. So I love these things here with these old winches and the old machinery. That's the part that I really get into. But at one time, these guys, the engines and the boilers, at one time they had a boiler in the engine located here. Then they built a central boiler plant, and they sent compressed air up here because a steam engine can run on compressed air or it can run on steam. But at one time they were all out in the open, and the hoisting engineers and the union, they got unionized, and they said, you know, we got to cover these things. Oh, we don't want to be out in the weather and stuff like that, like the poor quarry workers that had to work in the weather. So these guys got a building built over their heads, and they could put their pinup girls there. So they pass that around and take a look at it. And then I'll point out on the fence over here. Let's see if it's long enough. Well, you can't, oh, here's some here.
Cable.
Yeah. This is wire rope.
That sure looks like
And,
poison ivy.
I don't know if I can pull it.
That's poison ivy. Yeah, Tom, you're in poison ivy, you know.
It doesn't bother me too much. Yeah, all right, see this? This is wire rope. See this wire rope? And this would have been hoisting rope because you can see how I can bend it.
Yep.
If you see other wire rope around here, you know, it's not called cable, it's wire rope. It was invented around the 1850s by Roebling when they built the Brooklyn Bridge and all that. But you see how many strands there are in there. And the strands make it flexible. So this would have went with that hoisting engine because it would wrap around the drum. It was very flexible. The other stuff that held the derricks up, there's probably some examples around here. It's much heavier and it's stiffer. It might have been usually 4 or 5 strands. So,
Okay, we're going to move along to that.
we're going to move along. Here you have a better view.
Now that derrick,
Yep.
you said the top of the mast.
Yep.
In order to swivel the mast and the boom,
Had a
you
cap on
had
it.
a cap, and the cap was stationary, but the mast rotated inside the cap.
We're going to show you an example of that afterwards when we go back.
Yeah.
Down the steps is actually a derrick down there. We will cover that.
Okay.
But I won't waste too much time on it right now. Now this is a great photograph that would have been taken from right around here. Now there's other photographs. We're going to show you several photographs from here, so I'm glad everybody was able to make it over here. That side is Swingle's Quarry. It's all filled in. As you can see, that was around 300 feet deep. And if we want to, if it's too hot, we'll move up into the shade after. But this great photograph here, everybody come over here afterwards and take a look, because this is a great photograph that would have been taken from a bridge that went across from this quarry to the other. And it's like looking in that direction, and you can still see some of the granite outcroppings that look the same. You can pick them out. But look at how deep this quarry was in this photograph. And I want to hand this around so everybody can take a look at it closer. When you look at this quarry, these are men down here. Those are guys working down that quarry there, and they're all about my height, maybe a little bit taller, I don't know. But you know, I'm 5'6", 5'5" and a half maybe. But I mean, you can see how deep the quarry was. So what you're looking at is, there's that little house that I talked about over there. And actually the other photograph came from this one, I blew it up. Here's that derrick that I was standing on right over there. There's the derrick. Yeah. There's that house that had the winch, that was that little flat platform. Here's tabletop that you see right there. On the other side of tabletop, there would have been a derrick. Down here, way down there, see where it says you are conscious matter on the other side of that? There was another derrick down there. Then you can see there was another one over here. And we have some other pictures, but this is a great photograph showing the operation here. This quarry, I think it's filled up to about here now. All of this is all filled. So we're probably at about this level now. So what you're seeing exposed is just this. Now you see what in this area stood an Anion Bridge I told you about that Jonathan Swingle had built in 1904. The bridge went across here. He built the bridge in order to get his men and equipment to the other side of the quarry. That's Swingle's Quarry over there. And he had to build this bridge because the Granite Railway Company, which is right here, had worked their quarry, and you can't see it through these trees, but there's a narrow piece of granite strip that's in between us. And the Granite Railway Company worked right up to the property line, which is right here. You know, Granite Rail Swingles. He worked right up to Swingle's property line. So now Swingle's is over there, and he can't get over to the other side of his quarry. What the heck is he going to do? So he had to build this iron bridge. We'll have another photo of it there. I'll show you in a minute. to get his guys across and the equipment over there. And the reason why they were working this way was because of that extra dark granite. There was a vein of it that ran right in here, and they were pulling that extra dark granite out of this area. It's like a gold miner, like, oh man, there's the gold, you know? So there were 4 derricks that are visible in this photograph. Close examination shows half a dozen workers down in the quarry. Looking north towards quarry number 1, that's north, you can see the large grout piles over there in this photograph. This waste grout was sold for bridge and seawall work or crushed for road building material. The prize was getting out large blocks of granite to be used for monuments and buildings. That's what they were after. This grout was the waste, but it still had some value. 2 nice examples of monuments that are made from granite from this quarry, for any of you from this area, are the pedestal for the Admiral Farragut statue that's in Marine Park in South Boston on the way down to Castle Island. Well, that pedestal is from this quarry down and around this area because it was from the later period of the quarry. That's a nice piece of dark Quincy granite the Granite Railway Company supplied. And another one is Secretary William C. Collins Monument that's in Woodlawn Cemetery in New York. That was from 1904. The statue at Marine Park in South Boston was 1893. Around 1910, stone was being sawed into 2-inch thick sheets. They were starting to use saws, and they would like be a band saw, or there would be a circular saw, and they could saw it into these sheets like many of you have today for your granite countertops, how they saw the granite. Well, they started doing that around 1910, and then they would use that granite to face steel buildings. They'd still want granite, but they didn't want to make it out of big, huge blocks. So an example of that type of work is the dark polished granite on the first story of the Omni Parker House Hotel at the corner of Tremont Street and School Street in Boston. That was built in 1927. That polished granite stone from the Granite Railway Quarry looks as good today. If you go there, and I was just in Boston the other day, and every time I go there, I look at it, I says, oh my God, that stuff looks as good today as it did then. That Quincy granite has withstood the test of time. The Granite Railway Company did ship monumental stone as far away as Honolulu, Hawaii. So they sent a whole boxcar of it out there because people wanted it for monuments. And like we said, not little gravestone monuments, they wanted the big ones. But I'll pass this one around, people can look at.
Now, did the quality of the rock improve the deeper it went? I see there are a lot of fissures at the top.
Right.
Did the fissures become less deeper down?
Absolutely. If you study one of these photographs real closely, you'll see they call them seams, and you have like horizontal or vertical seams, and that is from the granite cooling. And actually, if the granite cools too slowly, that's when the seams develop, because it's a molten state, and then it's cooling off, and then over time, pressure and stuff like that. So the top layers, the seams might not be, as far apart as they would like. But as they went deeper, those horizontal seams could have been 30 or 40 feet apart. So they could get a huge block of granite out. And evidence of that is people from Boston, you go to Boston, take a look at the Boston Custom House. The Boston Custom House was built in the 1840s. Those columns are monolithic one-piece granite columns, not done by machine, all done by hand. They're fluted granite columns done by hand, and they're one solid block of granite. I think they're weighing about 60 tons each, if I'm correct. Maybe a little bit less or more, but around 60 tons each, a solid block of granite, not pieced together. And they came from this quarry, supplied some of them, maybe not all of them, because a lot of times with a government project like that, they couldn't supply all the columns of the same color from one quarry, so they might find another one that had the same color, and they would supply it. So all the columns from the Custom House, I don't know how many came from Granite Rail. I don't have the records from the government, and how many actually came from other quarries around here. Let me show you. This is a close-up of a previous photo. It shows the signalman. Now this derrick would have been over there. You can see some iron bars sticking up over there, and you can see a green rock that says, I think, I am on it up the top. Okay, well that's where that photograph, this photograph come from the other one. We dug into it, we pulled this one out. And what you're looking at is, you can see there's a guy here in this little box that was mounted there, leaning out over the quarry. He's a signalman. And it shows the signalman leaning over the quarry. In the days before radios, the signalman's job was to communicate using hand signals from the foreman in the quarry to the hoisting engineer that ran the winch. He couldn't see what was going on, and he didn't have a radio. And they're hooked onto like a 30-ton block, and they're hoisting it up. So the guy down on the bottom, the foreman down there, would be giving signals to that guy up there. Like I don't know that they still know it. Crane operators still know these hand signals to this day in case the radios go out. And I think it's like lower the boom, raise the hook, lower the hook. You know, it's a hold. You know, so they had all these hand signals. So that guy down the bottom would relay it to that guy, and that guy would relay it to the hoisting engineer who was out of sight, and he would operate the winch to control it.
So that's 200 feet away. That the
Well-
signal man was up top, and the guy in the quarry may have been 200 feet down.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, they see the hand signals.
Yeah, let's
And,
see if it's not cloudy.
So the Granite Railway Company had 8 modern derricks at the time this photo was taken in 1926. 5 derricks were at the quarry, and they had 3 smaller ones were at the yard at the bottom of the hill. The tallest derrick was 110 feet and had a 50-ton capacity, so one derrick could pick up a 50-ton stone. So if you're picking up a bigger stone, sometimes they had to put a couple together, you know, 2 derricks to lift it. Little piece of information I pulled up from the newspaper, so I'm always going to the newspaper archives to find stories. And on February 21st, 1929, at this quarry, they were attempting to lift a 30-ton stone over on that end. When it was near the top, one of the guy wires are these wires that held the mast up. They're on the top up here, and they went all over the place. One of the guy wires snapped. The boom and the stone and everything fell back into the quarry. That 30-ton block and the whole derrick fell back into the quarry. The workers at the bottom of the pit, they had to jump clear to avoid the splintering boom. So you can imagine being down in the hole, and this thing's coming down, and it's crashing in, breaking apart, and pieces are going everywhere, and they jumped out of the way. The manager at the time was Henry M. Faxon, very famous Quincy guy. He was the manager of this quarry, and he said, due to strict safety procedures at the quarry, under my leadership, nobody was injured. But
Is that true?
you know, they were just lucky. They were lucky. That's what it was. But that's a great picture, and it's a close-up of what you would have seen over there. What's the next one, Al? Yep.
The shed here.
Yep.
I was trying to place it against that.
Oh,
I can't.
yeah, I know. It's kind of funny when you
Is
blow
it
these
buried
pictures up.
by the
No, when you
fill?
blow these pictures up, it kind of like puts stuff out of distortion. But you see that there? That's another winch house. That shed that you're looking at. And see where it says you are conscious matter?
Yes.
That shed would have been on the other side over there. There's a boardwalk over there. And I think when we walked down there, I would point that out too. But that's where that was. And that was another winch house that went to a derrick that would have been over there. But when you do blow these pictures up, sometimes they get a little out of context. Yep. Okay. Now this one, we're looking this way. And kind of like taken from this vantage point, and you're looking back that way. There's the powerhouse you can see in Swingles. And in this photo, this was taken in 1916. This is another one from the Thomas Crane Library. You can see it if you look closely. They're lifting a large block of granite from the quarry right there. You'd have to look at it closely to see it. On the right side of the photo, there are 3 workers. They're splitting a block to size. On the right side, over here, they're splitting the block. These guys here, a big block of granite, they're splitting it up. The grout pile in the background is stone not suitable for monuments and will be sold as what we call riprap, like for seawalls and stuff like that. To lift these large blocks from the quarry, they would drill holes into the ends of the granite block sometimes, and then they would put a set of dogs in there. Kind of like the dogs almost look like ice tongs almost, but bigger. And they would pick it up. A lot of times they would just wrap a big chain around the block and they would lift it up. Another story is here was on April 18th, 1914, and I got these stories from the Patriot Ledger, a fatal accident claimed the life of Michael O'Neill at that quarry, at the Granite Railway Quarry, while they were lifting a block weighing several tons from the quarry bottom. The chain that was wrapped around the block slipped, and he was in the way and it crushed him to death. So Mr. O'Neill lived right on Bates Ave, which is right down the street here. That's my street I live on. I don't remember him. I wasn't born then. But he left a wife and 1 son, 3 daughters. He's buried in St. Mary's Cemetery, which is right here in West Quincy. The Granite Workers Memorial that we have here in Copeland Street in Shea Park has a brick wall, a brick walk I should say, when you go to that memorial we have in Quincy. There's a brick walk and it lists many of the men and boys that lost their lives working in the granite industry. And it was a dangerous industry. You had falls into the quarry, you had these derricks falling into the quarry, and the young kids would get killed. When we go to the turning mill, I could explain it even better. But the young kids would be working when they were 15 years old sometimes at these stone sheds. And think of it, in those days, these stone sheds, they had nothing but, you know, big flat belts and no guards, and the kids would get in the way and they get caught in the belt. Now you're looking at this picture that everybody sees, and these guys are standing on the bridge that used to go across here. You can just see the remnants of the bridge. There's a piece of iron right there. They cut the bridge down. There's a pipe that used to go across to the other side. And if you come up here when the trees are gone, it looks a little bit better. People can move into the shade if it's too hot there. So this photo here, that's a famous photo. You see this on books and everything. This was taken in 1916. Shows a group of workers in what they called the grout boat at Swingle's Quarry. The bridge plate, which we have at the museum, says built by Berlin Construction Company, Berlin, Connecticut in 1904. Swingle had this bridge built so he could get his workers to the other side of the quarry, as I mentioned before. As I said, the Granite Railway Company worked their quarry right up the property line in search of a vein of that extra dark granite. And as I said before, the color of the granite changed from one end of the quarry to the other, but they were after the dark stuff. That bridge that these guys are standing on stood for almost 100 years. When it was finally cut down for safety reasons, Bernie Sweeney of Quincy saved the builder's plate and donated it to the Quarry Museum. You see these guys, that's how they would get down to the quarry. They would ride that boat. A lot of those boats, they were like empty compressor tanks that were cut in half. I'll tell you a story real quick. Years ago, we were doing a thing at the State Archives when I was a lot younger, and there were some people that today they'd be 100 years old, and one woman was there and she's telling the story about her father coming to work at Swingle's Quarry. And she said, well, my father, you know, he was down the local pub the night before and he got into an argument with another guy that worked with him at the quarry. And they started having a fist fight and blah, blah, blah. She goes, well, they went home. They went to work in the morning. The two guys get into this quarry boat to go into the quarry. The fight starts up again. She says, so they start swinging at one another once again because of the fight the early night. Now the hoisting engineer, because he could see them because they're up in the air like that, sees what's going on, and he just takes it upon himself to settle this matter. So what he did was the hoisting engine, they had a little brake on them so they could lower him into the quarry quick or slow. He let off the brake, so the bucket just jumped down like that, and he started lowering them down real fast, which meant that these guys, you can see, none of them were holding on to the cables that hold the bucket. They all had to reach and hold on to the cables and hold on to one another so they wouldn't fall out. Well, they got to the bottom, she said, and the foreman was in the bucket. And he said, the two guys who were fighting, he goes, you and you get back in the bucket and go home without pay for the day, and you can explain to your wives why. He says, the rest of you guys get to work. And he goes, that's how they settled things in those days. The guys went home, no pay. Yeah, this is a picture right here looking into Swingles, and you can see here they are going down into the quarry, into that bucket. That's another one, another great quarry. It shows them coming up out of in the grout boat. That was taken in 1916. Part of the walls in the photo are still visible from this vantage point. Well, not really. They're on the other side of that, where the paint is there. I think there's still a wall there. If you were to walk into the quarry, you would see it better. But to the left, we can see one end of the bridge. Someplace. Oh, yeah. Here's the other end of the bridge over there. And this is interesting because there's a wonderful story that we come up with by Florence Collins. It was published in the Patriot Ledger on March 24th, 1959. It tells the story of her father, Albert Buttman, a Scandinavian immigrant that worked at the Granite Railway Quarry. She tells how as a young girl of 9 years old, she would sometimes have to deliver lunch to her father at the quarry. The building on the left was her destination, across the bridge that divided the Granite Rail and Swingles. She said it had a rooster weather vane on top of it. That picture has a rooster weather vane on top of it if you look at it closely. She says one day her father's lunch pail came home with a co-worker with bad news for her mother. Father had slipped climbing up from the quarry and was in the hospital. He survived the fall, and after a long recovery went back to work, but she said he was never the same. He lived 8 more years working every day at the quarry. He finally died the week after Thanksgiving in 1927. He was only 55 years old. So they did have ladders in the quarry. Sometimes these guys would climb up and down the ladders. They wouldn't get in the boat. But it's so interesting when you get a photograph like that, and then I go to the library and you go through the newspaper archives and you come up with a story. And you go, where was that building? Where was it? Then you look at the photo and you can see it. There's the Rooster Weatherby.
Is the bridge in that picture? Those look like retaining walls, but do they support the bridge?
The bridge is, the end of the bridge is right here.
Oh, off the picture.
Huh? Yeah.
So why do they have that retaining wall? Is there
That
must be
retaining
something-
wall would have been over there. The trees, you can't see it. But as they quarried the granite, they would have built these walls so the guys could walk around, so they didn't have to go like this. If you walk around, they call it the bank of the quarry. So over there, they would have taken some of the riprap, the grout and stuff like that, and they would have built these walls to make it level.
So they have a workspace?
Yeah, kind of a workspace and a way to get around too. Otherwise, you know, you got to remember the quarry's deep. You don't want to have to go down and up and stuff to get around the rim of the bank. They call it the bank of the quarry. So you'll see a lot of them, and some of them still exist over there. But nature's reclaiming this area. Obviously, the trees are growing everywhere. Yeah, we'll move along here. Here's another photo, and you can take a look at that one. This is another view of the Granite Railway Quarry from an undetermined location, taken in 1916 by R.W. Plummer. The building on the left does say Granite Railway over the windows. Because the topography changed so much over the years as they were doing this quarry, it's difficult to pinpoint the location of this view. We are now going to retrace our steps after this one. We're going to go back, and we're going to go back to where we came from, and we're going to head down into the quarry. Because there's no other way to get down there, so we have to go back that way. So that's another photo. We don't know exactly where it was, maybe over there. And we're going to move down this way.
What is the quarry filled in?
I think it was filled in the 1980s during the big dig. This particular quarry was filled in with what they called historic fill from the big dig, which came from the Fort Point Channel. And they meant historic fill, they mean oil and other stuff in it. So they had to cap it. All right, so this is a little bit tricky getting down the steps. So I don't know if anybody doesn't feel comfortable coming down the steps, we can walk around the other way. But I think if we're very careful, we're gonna just gather down in that grassy area. But as you're going down the steps, I'm gonna point out one thing. When you get down to the level spot down here,
Are we coming back up this? Oh.
no. But we can help you
No,
get
I'm
down the
just wondering
steps.
about taking my help.
Just watch your step.
Yeah, it might help.
My help. It's a very one for me.
As you get down to the bottom, wait till a couple of people. As you get down to the bottom, you can look to the left or right, and you're going to see these big drill marks like that on both sides, and that's how they split the granite out of the quarry. I'll explain it down there better, so nobody trips going down the steps. But there's examples of it all over the place. And you're going to meet me around there, Al? I'll wait for you down there. Oh, you're all set, right? Yep. Okay. So, yeah, this is a derrick. I'll explain that when Al comes over with the stuff. But
Oh, there's the
what I wanted to explain to people is we were coming down the steps, and you can't see them from here, but there are examples of this around the quarry if you look closely. You can see it through the graffiti. You see those 3 drill holes there? Well, that's what they call Lewis holes, okay? So as we went down the stairway to the left and to the right, and anytime anybody ever comes up here on their own, you'll remember to look for this, and you can see them in other parts of the quarry, like I said. You'll notice on both sides are examples of what they call a Lewis hole. So this is a drawing from an old ad that was in the Granite magazine, and it shows a Sullivan pneumatic drill. That's that thing. It's mounted on a tripod, and it's drilling a Lewis hole. Now, what that means is when they were taking out large blocks of granite, they would drill 3 or 4 holes close together that you saw, and they'd be parallel to each other. Then in between those holes, the partitions, they put an iron bar in there and they'd break out the piece that was in between the holes, the little membrane. They called that bar a set. They break that out with a set. This leaves a wide rectangular hole in which they could put the black powder. Or they would put a canister. They would take a flat canister and it would have black powder and it would have sometimes a fuse or mostly electrical wires coming out of it. So they would drill these. Now they're taking out a big block of granite, so they got 3 of them drilled here, then they'd move over here 4 or 5 feet, they drill another 3, you know, depending on how big a piece of granite out, they drill them, and they'd set the charges, boom, 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 like that. So then when they set it off, they could blast that piece of granite away from the ledge. Now already, this side had been cleared, this side had been cleared, and the bottom had been cleared, so the last thing is to get that block out is to blast it away from the ledge. So the Lewis holes could be put in series, like I said, along the bench, they called it a bench, at distances of 10 feet apart to get on a large piece of granite. This method gave more control of the direction of the blast. 3 holes, when they did 3, they called it a complex Lewis hole. When they did 4, it was called a compound Lewis hole. An earlier method of blasting was by drilling what they called the Knox hole. The Knox hole was a single hole and it had a groove cut in each side, kind of like oval shaped, like an egg, and that groove would have been to direct the force of the blast, so they could control it. The hole was drilled out, then powder, and when they drilled the hole, a Knox hole, the hole would have been drilled out, then they would sometimes dry it out, they would put black powder in there, then they would put straw on top of the black powder, then they would put clay or dirt on top of the straw, and then the charge was lightly tamped and fired by a fuse or electric blasting cap. So that's a typical pneumatic drill. That's the drill on a tripod stand. And a lot of these pictures from this period of time after pneumatic tools came into use about 1890, 1910. Around the 1890s they first started using them, but they weren't very reliable. Even though they had pistons and they had steam engines and they had other things, they weren't reliable because the seals on them weren't that good in the rings, and you're dealing with drilling granite and dirt and dust. So what I meant by not reliable, they would work for a couple of days and then they'd clog up. And these guys, you know, they said, we're not spending a lot of money to buy these tools, we're going to just do it by hand, until they made them much more reliable to use. So Al came back, and Al, we have the derrick, right? Over here. So that's a typical Sullivan pneumatic drill. Now what's behind me is a derrick that has really deteriorated, and in the woods, it's all overgrown. We didn't get a chance to come up here and clear it out. I think Al has a picture of it. I can explain this. Here's a picture of the derrick. All right, this is a picture of the derrick set up and where it came from. This is a stone shed that used to be down in Quincy. So this is the actual picture of this derrick. And what you're looking at is 2 pieces of the derrick in the woods here. And I can go in here, but the cap for the derrick is over there. And over here, oh, this was on the top of the derrick. It's all overgrown. I don't know if I can get this stuff out of here so you can see it. I should have come up here with a weed whacker. Here's the top. If you look at this, that was the very top of the derrick. This part here. And so the derrick, this derrick came from the Barnacle Granite Works at Center Street in Quincy. It was erected at that site in 1890 and was in use for succeeding firms at that location until about 1986, when the present owner of the Hancock Monument Company sold the property and donated the derrick and the contents of this historic stone shed to the MDC, which is now the DCR. This was one of the last wooden derricks to survive in Quincy. The stone shed was polygonally shaped or designed with openings arranged to face the central derrick. So you can see that when they built the stone sheds in those days, they wanted to make it so that these guys could push their cart, they called it a banker cart, with their stone on it. They were making monuments. They could push it outside in the good weather, and they had plenty of light to carve the stone and see what they were doing with, because the sheds were poorly lit, probably not electricity. Some of them still had kerosene lanterns. But that derrick would have been shaped so it could have lifted up blocks from any place along that polygonally shaped shed. I'm saying the word right. These derricks here, they were much smaller than the quarry derrick. Remember I said a quarry derrick would have been 36 by 36? a derrick like this had a capacity of like 10 or 12 tons, and that was about it. And the pieces of the derrick would have been the base block, which is that big block down there, the derrick, that would have been buried in the ground, not the one with the shiv on it, but the one further down. That would have been buried in the ground, and on the edge of the derrick, there's a little pin that sat in a hole so that it could pivot. That would have, well, the other parts are here. I should start with the other part. So the guide cap that we were talking about, the guide cap is back here. Well, here's the guide cap, and what this has, this guide cap would have went on the top of that, and here are those wire ropes I talked about. We cut them to get the derrick down, but these would have stretched all the way across the quarry to hold this mast up. And then this has a hole in it so that it would have rotated around that part there that would have been in the top of the derrick.
What has a hole?
Well, this is a piece of metal.
So on top of that piece, there was a big fat plate. But you walk over here and get poison ivy.
Yeah.
Then you get a big fat plate sits on top of that thing. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Because that has a thing that obviously goes in.
Yeah, there's a pin sticking out of it, and then this plate would have been on the top so that the derrick could rotate.
Right.
We don't have any better pictures of it, but that would have been mounted way up the top.
That you mentioned that was not
Yeah,
flexible.
yeah, this one here is very thick.
Unlike the other.
See how thick it is? You can't bend that at all. But that would have held the derrick up. But anyhow, the parts of it are here. Unfortunately, this thing here has deteriorated to the point where there's really not much left of it. When we used to get these tours a long time ago, it was in a better state. It was all cleaned out around here, but the DCR does not come up here and do much manpower or do any work. I can tell you a funny story about this though. When we were, I helped take it down, and the very top of this derrick, there's a pulley. See that pulley up here on the very top of the derrick? And beside this stone shed, which is down on Center Street, down in Quincy. Anybody familiar with Quincy? There's a Jiffy Lube and a Dunkin' Donuts shop there. But beside, not where the stone shed used to be, it's gone, and now that's what's there. But beside it, there's an apartment building that was built when this stone shed was still in operation. And the guy that owned it told me the story about, he goes, there was a pulley up the top, and the bearing was no good on it. We don't have the pulley yet, but he says it used to make a noise. Every time he started the derrick up, it would be squeaking. Like that. It was like a horrible noise. And he says, he goes, I had to hire a guy to climb up there and put oil on it because there was a woman that complained that lived in the apartment building. Every day I started that thing up, the woman would call me up and she goes, that thing is making a lot of noise again and it won't fit. So he says, I had to hire a guy. It cost me $30 in those days to get the guy to go up there and oil it. He goes, I got tired of paying this guy. He says, he goes, there's got to be a better way to do this. He goes, he says, I come up with an idea. He goes, I would get a sandwich bag, a baggie. I would fill it with oil. And he goes, and then I would tie it onto the wire rope that went up through the pulley. And he goes, and I'd start my winch up, and he goes, and when I went up, it would break when I got up the top, and it would oil it. And he goes, and that would shut her up, he says, it goes that squeaking again.
That chain there, is that the whole, when you pull that out, the chain would
That would have been, that's the part that's up here, and it would have held the pulley. But we're gonna move on. What time is it anyhow? How are we doing for time?
7 after 11.
Oh, okay.
What is this?
But the ability to rotate this big fat log
Yep.
was at the bottom of the thing. There was some kind of gear or cog thing that.
This yellow thing would have been mounted on the base, and I don't know if you can't see it in this picture, but they call this the bull ring, and it's all overgrown. But see how it's a big round ring? This would have been mounted on the base. That's the bottom. That's the bottom over there of the derrick. You see where the square notches are? That's where this would have been mounted. So this would have had this big ring mounted here, and that would have had a rope around it, and the wire rope, the cable around it, that would have been hooked to the winch, and that's how they could rotate this derrick. And of course, the top, like I said, it had that guy cap with the wires, so the wire rope to hold the derrick up so it could rotate it. The other part of it on the other side would have been the boom, which is this part. And I mean, if you looked at the picture closely, you can still see this part that's on the boom there, that yellow top of it right there. So that's the actual derrick. It only did about 10 or 12 tons. It was brought up here when this stone shed was demolished by the MDC, but it's just been left here to peacefully rot away. This part would have been mounted on the ground. This would have been buried, and that derrick on the very bottom, there's a little pin on the bottom there that would have sat in this little hole called the kettle. See that little hole? So this whole derrick is sitting in this little hole here, and that's what it rotated on. A lot of times, a lot of these derricks, they would have been mounted on a block of granite like this. Instead of having this piece of cast iron, there would have just been a hole drilled in there, and they'd have a little pin. And that's all it sat on, and it was held up by those guide wires.
And what's this, nice, is this the
That's the
pole?
fall block. That's, you can't see it in the picture, but they called that the fall block that would have had the hook on it, and it's very heavy. And the reason being is even when there wasn't any weight on it, it would keep all the cables all tight on the drum so they wouldn't all become loose. So that's a big fall block. That hasn't disappeared because it's too heavy for the scrap metal guys to even get in here and get it
And
away.
that iron ring there,
Yeah, that's the bottom of the derrick. It's kind of deteriorated. But anyhow, yeah, that's a wooden derrick, and there were many of them. There were hundreds of them things in Quincy. There are no more left. All the derricks you see today, if you were to go up to New Hampshire or anything else like that, I think they're all made out of steel, or they use cranes nowadays. I mean, these would not be safe by any means, you know, to use anymore.
do you have any idea where this come from?
Yeah, it's Oregon spruce. That's a good question. Where did these come from? In the early days, we have documentation of the early days, I'm saying the early 1900s, 1910 or so, when ships transitioned from sailing ships to steamships. There was a lot of cases where these old sailing schooners, when they were decommissioned, the mast would be saved and used for derricks.
Did you
Because it
used
was-
to work here?
Huh?
Did you used to work?
No, I worked as a boiler guy, steam engineer. But I grew up here, kind of. I grew up down the street, so I come up here a lot, and I do a lot of reading. So I'm like an amateur historian.
Tom's our museum historian.
Yeah.
He says amateur, but he's our historian.
And I'm like, and you know what I really enjoy is archaeology. I says if I was to do a new trade, if I was a little bit younger, I think I love archaeology and digging and finding old tools like stuff and like what you found, the coal and everything, and looking at it and just picturing back where it came from and who was using it. Especially when you find an old tool. When I pick up an old tool around here, we have some at the museum when we go up there, and I pick up a tool and I go, geez, what was that? Or what was this used for? And then you just have to be like a detective. You're not solving a murder, but you're solving this mystery of like, what was this used for? And that's a lot of fun for me. But,
My dad likes to read too.
does he? Yeah, we're gonna move on a little bit more. Now, we're gonna go over here, and then there's a boardwalk, and then we're gonna get onto the incline, and then we're gonna come back up the hill. So like we said once before, we're gonna stay in the flat ground until we get past the boardwalk. Oh yeah, I'm gonna explain this. We'll move over here a little bit, then I'll explain it over here. Just to keep moving, I think.
How much fill is this? About 400 feet down here when we walk across this
This would have been, actually the edge of the quarry was over here. The edge of the quarry was pretty much over here. So this is a good photograph that's going to show it. Stop right about there, Al. Right there for a minute while I just explain this one. Yeah, this is a good spot to explain this one right here, everybody. So this photograph would have been taken from over there someplace. And pretty much what you can see in the background is that big mound that's still there. Okay, that's the only thing that you're going to identify in this photograph. This would have been over there a little bit to that way, kind of like looking that way. And what you can see here is there used to be a derrick down around there, which is right here. This is the edge of the quarry. There's actually a steam train in this photograph because there was a Quarry Railroad that was built in 1893 that goes out on that main road out there, Rushuti Drive. That was the site of the Quincy Quarry Railroad. They built a railroad up here in 1893, and then the railroad cut in this way for the Granite Railway Quarry. So in this photo, you can see this was quarry number 2, they called it. Quarry number 1 is over there. Then they come out this way and they did quarry number 2, and then it went quarry number 3. as I pointed out before, this was solid granite all the way across. This would have been one big solid mound of granite in 1830 when they come up here and open up this quarry. And we started off at the end of the quarry up at this end, but as we move down the incline, we're going back in time. We're going back to the earliest days, and many people know the Granite Railway. What was associated with the Granite Railway was called the Granite Railway Quarry, but it was the Granite Railway. The Granite Railway preceded the quarry. It was built pretty much as a means to transport the granite for the Bunker Hill Monument. Not built by the Bunker Hill Monument Association. It was a private enterprise for profit, and the first contract that they had is called the first commercial railway in America. And the first contract they had was to haul stone for the building of the Bunker Hill Monument for the Bunker Hill Monument Association. And that contract only lasted about a year. Solomon Willard, who was the architect and who had signed on and wanted the Granite Railway built as a means to get the monument built, wasn't very happy with the Granite Railway after about a year or so. He wasn't very happy with delays. There's a lot of politics that were involved in it, and I could get into that story, and it's kind of funny when you read his memoirs. Perkins was the president, Thomas H. Perkins was the president and the financier, pretty much owned all of the stock for the Granite Railway Company. It was supposed to be 50 shares of stock divided amongst 6 or 7 different people, but Perkins ended up owning most of the stock. And the agreement was, yeah, we signed a contract with the Bunker Hill Monument Association to haul the granite. But as Perkins was building the railroad, he also was buying up land up here, and there's this huge ledge. Now, as the railroad was being built, Solomon Willard was working a quarry that the Bunker Hill Monument Association obtains the rights to take all the granite to build the monument. And that's about a mile in that direction. It's called the Bunker Hill Quarry. So they had the Monument Association had the rights, the mineral rights pretty much, to take all that granite for the building of the monument there. But Perkins is building the railroad to get to them. You know, a mile past down here where we're going to go, over there. And he's buying up this land, and then he goes to them and he petitions them. He says, well, you know, how about if you abandon the quarry over there and we start taking the granite from my quarry up here? It'd be a lot cheaper. And then Willard just went out of his mind. He threatened to quit because he already had 3,000 tons of granite blocks already quarried and hammered and cut, and it was all sitting over there a mile from here waiting for the railroad to get to him to bring it to the monument. And when he heard this scheme of Perkins, like, oh yeah, just forget about all the work you did over there the last couple of years. Let's just take it from here. Let's start all over. He had no part of it. He threatened to quit. They finally relented, and Perkins built the railroad, and he had to build it another mile to get over to him. And they finally, a little bit late for Willard's liking, but they finally started hauling the monument to the Bunker Hill Monument. And that's a whole different story that we cover with a different tour we do, but I just wanted to get into that.
What year was the bunker, or the one somewhere in there? What year?
Well, 1823 they started quarrying. In 1826 the railway was finished, and it was November of 1826 that they actually moved the first test load of granite from the Bunker Hill Quarry down to the wharf. And then it wasn't until the spring that they started taking more granite. And like I said, that's a whole different story that we didn't intend to cover today, because that's a different thing. But the reason I got into that was, picture this area in 1830 and what it looked like. This was nothing but one big, huge granite ledge. And that granite railway that's associated with this quarry, the railroad itself, when they did open this quarry in 1833, they didn't come up here with steam trains, obviously. It was a horse-drawn train. They didn't come up from the bottom of the hill, up from the incline that we're at. The incline stopped on the other side of this ledge when they built the Granite Railway incline on the railroad. And it had to go around this big, huge ledge. So the original Granite Railway came around the back here, and it came in here. Because you're working the ledge, you're taking these granite blocks off, and you're sliding it down to the railroad, which was been over there. All of that's gone. It's all been dug up. There's no remnants of the old Granite Railway there. The only thing that's left is what we're going to see in a little bit when we go down to the incline plane. There's another section that's over at the Bunker Hill Quarry. We're not going to that today. And then there's another section at the wharf on the Neponset River where the Granite Railway Company wharf was. But I'm getting off track. So, like I said, this picture here you're looking at, this is quarry number 2. The construction of the Quincy Quarry Railroad, which was anything to do with the Granite Railway, which was over 6 miles, had 6 miles of track in West Quincy. That was in 1893. So this steam railroad was built. It included spur tracks to many of the quarries that enabled the quarry owners to ship out granite. So the Granite Railway Company by 1893 had abandoned their railway operations because it was a horse-drawn railway, and they were hauling their granite out of here by steam train by the Quincy Quarry Railroad. That's why you see this locomotive in here. It came from the railroad that was over there. So now the Granite Railway Company is no longer in the railway business by 1893. They're just in the granite business, and they're paying to transport the stone by the Quincy Quarry Railroad.
So the customs house was 1840-ish. So it was built by using the labor of horses,
Oh, yeah.
drawing the trains.
Yeah, and there might have been some steam power used building the custom house. I'm not exactly sure because they did have some steam engines by the 1840s. As a matter of fact, I think the final capstone for the Bunker Hill Monument in 1840 something was hoisted with a steam engine. So they were using some small steam powered equipment by then.
Oh, that's quite a train. That's
Yeah.
got
It's not a narrow gauge railroad. It was a
3, 4, 5, 6,
Standard-
maybe 7.
Standard gauge railroad.
Yeah, but it was like seven stone cars.
They shipped thousands of tons of granite from not only this quarry and Swingles and Berries, but there were 57 quarries in Quincy. About 20 of them were up along this area here. And there were smaller quarries, and they were taking out all various different sized stones. And like I said, what's all big? The big money was in the big stones, the big monumental stones. But the other stuff was useful too, because they were building railroads. They were building, smaller buildings. They were using it for seawalls. So the granite was being used for everything, breakwaters, seawalls, everything.
Picture
This is
standing right
another
here.
great photo, and this one here this would have been looking right over there. See? You talked about those stone walls that they built. Somebody was mentioning that. We were talking about it. That wall that you see in here used to go right across from that spot to that spot. So those guys didn't have to go like this to get across. So there is all that riprap and stone wall that they built there. Well, several years ago, maybe 10 years ago, the DCR, somebody said, that's unsafe, that's unstable, we gotta take that down. So they got a crane up here, because this is all filled by that time. So they had a crane in here, and the guy was taking it down. And I come up here watching him take this unstable wall down. Boy, did he have a hard time getting that wall down. Well, the whole purpose of taking that down was there was some good blocks of granite there. Those things went into some projects the DCR was doing, the seawalls along Wollaston Beach and other places. And they didn't have to go buy granite and have it cut. They had a ready source of it right here, but it wasn't that unstable, I can tell you. But that was they called it the wall when they swam up here, and people would actually jump off of it. You could walk across it. But that's what it looked like over there, and I think we're probably filled into about this level now. But you can also see, that's a great picture. It shows you, look at, there's no horizontal seams there. That face over there, that granite as you went down, it was like, you go 30 or 40 feet with those seams. Yep.
That point right there.
Right there.
Yeah,
That
it's sticking out.
orange
Yeah.
pink circle.
Yeah. That's what you can still make out some of the features. That's why
You can see how that point right here, this point right here, is what you're looking at right up there, the top point there.
Yep.
All this grout was piled behind it. It all went
To various
filled
places. Yeah.
various places. Yeah.
all gone. But that's what it would have looked like, and that's what remains of it. And you can see there was that. There's another derrick up there. There's another winch house, and that derrick would have been mounted over there someplace. Actually, that's the one that I showed in the photograph. No, wait a minute. There was another derrick over here. There was one here. There's one there, and there was one there. There were 3 of them up there. There were 3 derricks. One there, one out in the middle, and one over there.
It's great when you get photos so you can actually
Right,
see
and
what's
then
standing
there must
here.
have been another derrick almost
Oh, yeah.
where we're standing.
Sure.
There's one over here.
Oh, okay, that's
And then
Derricks
I
really
think there was
well.
another one over there. Yeah,
That's
this
great.
one here. This one shows 2 more that were down here.
Right over here.
Yeah, this photograph is looking that way. So there was a derrick there, and there was another one down there. So you can see they had derricks all over the place. And some of these would have been moved. But those are 2 great photographs, and these are both from about. I don't know if I have a date on this one here. This one had to have been like 19. This one's before 1918 because that train that's in this one, that Quincy Quarry Railroad disappeared in 1918. So this is in between 1893 and 1918. Exactly when, I don't know. I'm saying around 1914 or 1913. I don't have an exact date on it, but we can date it that way. And the guy that took this photograph, Parker, Warren S. Parker, he was a city building inspector. He had an interest in Quincy history. He took hundreds of these photos around Quincy from 1875 until 1932, and he gave slide lectures on various subjects. His glass plate slides and notes are in the possession of the Thomas Crane Public Library. So he was doing photography with the old glass plate negatives. Then they took them and they've digitized them. And as I said, anybody that didn't hear me, that wasn't here when we started the tour, you can go on the Thomas Crane Public Library site. You can actually see these pictures and a lot more from that collection. We've taken them out to just show once for this one.
Move on to quarry number 1.
Okay, we're going to walk over here. This is still pretty flat ground over here. Behind us is actually water in this quarry, but these are photographs that would have been taken from out there. And let me see which one I'm looking at first here. So we're looking into this here. That's an early one. This here, we're looking into this quarry here, and this would have been, you hold this one for me for a sec. We're looking into what would have been quarried number 1. So like I said, there was solid granite ledge across here, all the way across. So this is where they first started taking the granite from when they come up here in 1830. So this is quarry number 1. And as you're looking in here, this photograph here was taken by Parker between 1875 and 1932. This is obviously an early one because when we're looking at this photograph compared to another one, I don't see any compressed air pipes, and close examination shows the workers using hand drills in here. So this is a very early photograph that he would have taken, probably around the 1870s. The quarry doesn't look like it's as deep as it was in the later photographs. So from this quarry, probably, it was opened very early, probably came the granite for the Boston Custom House that was built in 1837, and Binance Ledge Light, which was built in 1855. It probably came from this quarry here. The Quincy Patriot Ledger, July 22nd, 1844, gives an account of a massive stone that was 50 feet long by 25 feet high and 28 feet wide, and it weighed 3,181 tons, being moved from its bed using 4 casks of black powder. A portion of this stone was used for the columns for the hall of the Horticultural Society on School Street in Boston. I don't know if they still exist there or not, but anyhow, when you're looking in here, you can see the railroad at this period of time in the 1870s actually came in. Here's the railroad tracks. Here's a picture that was taken at a later period of time. You can hold that one. And you can see this is the same looking in here, but it's changed. It's from a later period because it's a little bit deeper. It's a little bit deeper than this one. And you can also see that in this photograph here, you can see some wooden stage in there. That's to hold up the compressed air line. So that's when they built this compressed air plant down the bottom of the hill, and they sent compressed air up here, and they were using the pneumatic tools. So this is from a later period.
Staging? I'll hold this one.
Yeah, this wooden structure over here. That's a wooden structure that would have been mounted over here. And if you look at it real closely, you'll see there's pipes, either steam pipes or pneumatic, air pipes. Yep.
The one you're holding looks more like the train tracks today than
I know. It does, doesn't it?
You're right.
But you look at
Much
that.
more so than that.
There's tracks there, but there's wood. But yeah, that is an early
These are
photograph.
wood tracks.
No.
Well, there's iron there.
There's iron, but they use the wood to prevent
Protect it.
the rails from,
Yep.
well, or protect the stone from knocking out the rail.
I think they did, yeah.
Yeah.
And they also they moved the tracks around, as you can see from this photograph. So, but anyhow, those are 2 pictures. It's all overgrown, so you can't really see. But if you come up here in the fall, or like you're a navy-bodied hiker, you can walk all the way around up the top of there. From up there, there's beautiful views. But you got to be in pretty good shape to get up there. I mean, there's a path that goes up there. So you're welcome to do that anytime. We're not going to do it today, obviously, but beautiful views from up there.
Can I, one fact of context, and if it's wrong, maybe somebody here knows.
Yep.
The Customs House was built in 1836, you said, because...
I think it started, what did I say?
No, but here's why it was built, which I think is really interesting. There was so much smuggling, but there were so many ships coming in and out that they could no longer keep accurate track of who was smuggling and who wasn't. So they put up the customs house. Is that, is
I
that
think
true?
that's true, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
not sure, but I bet that
At one
sounds
point in
logical.
time, the Customs House collected a significant portion of the federal government revenue. In other words, the Port of Boston was very popular.
Long
And-
Wharf was the source of the economy at that time.
Yeah, and now the Customs House was a neoclassical building in 1843, but it was only like 40 or 50 feet high. And then about World War I, they decided to put on the 26 stories.
1914.
So they had the 26 stories added on later. And
That's Cape Ann granite. The tower is Cape Ann granite. The original custom house is Quincy granite, but the tower is Cape Ann.
yeah, and Norcross Brothers built the thing.
You know, you mentioned custom houses. You gotta remember, the custom houses up and down the Atlantic coast, as far as New Orleans, are all built with Quincy granite. So
Yeah.
Quincy granite was shipped all up and down the coast as far as New Orleans
Well, the early
to build their
custom
custom
houses-
house, which is still standing today.
New Orleans
So what
Custom
about the
House,
custom house?
I
Is
think
it
one in
Marriott
Atlanta, I'm not
the
sure,
one
but
that's out on
along the coast. And the reason being is we had the quarries,
the custom
and we had a way to transport
Yeah.
it. That we had to go along the coast because the railroads
Some of it
weren't
possibly was from
completely
there, but again, they were
in
getting
existence in the
They were
early
just
1800s.
starting, and they
Right.
started, the railroad started in about 1830. So your
Right.
cog railroad
Yep.
predates.
It's not a
but-
cog railroad.
All right.
It's a
but-
horse-drawn tramway.
Okay.
Think of the monk. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to get that so somebody didn't pick up on that. Never a cog railway.
Okay.
But we're gonna go down to that next. We're gonna go visit the incline, then come back up, and we can move along, I guess.
What were you gonna say about it?
Well, his railroad was one of the first ones in America.
First commercial railroad in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know that's funny. The Quincy and everybody they always used to call it the first railway in America. And then there's a professor. So this is a great picture that would have been taken this way, looking down into the quarry. You can see that wall there. This photo here was published in the book "The First Railroad in America," Walton Advertiser, and was put out in 1926. The Granite Railway Company actually put out this memorial book for their 100th anniversary in 1926. It was privately printed. There are a few copies of it, and of course they put in there, well, we built the Bunker Hill Monument and we built Minot Sledge Light, and well, yeah, they had a little to do with building the Bunker Hill Monument, transporting some of the granite, not all of it, but they always like to capitalize on that, 100 years later. This incline would have been 315 feet long. So
Okay.
we would have gone up there, and if you look through the trees, you can just see where the other part of it is. The top half of this and this section was all dug out when they were building the Southeast Expressway, and they were digging in all in here. They dug all this out, and they took it away for fill because they needed fill to fill the marshlands in down by Neponset. There was an endless chain. Not a cable, but a chain, because it was built in 1830. They weren't using wire rope till the 1850s, and Manila rope would have been way too thick, so they used chain. So they would have had an endless chain that would have had a counterweight attached to one side. A 1-ton counterweight on one side was sufficient to lower down from the quarry a 9-ton loaded wagon on the other side. So people had looked at this for years and they said, well, wait a minute. At some point, if you're a mechanical engineer, you say, at some point you're going to reach this equilibrium and this thing's going to get out of control. They had to have some type of braking device. What did they use to brake it with? Nobody knew until we found this newspaper story that was written after there was an accident on this in I think it was 1832. There were visitors that came here. One guy from Cuba, Thomas Bacchus, and 3 other guys from Boston. One visitor from Cuba. They came here in 1832 to check out this incline and this railway and how it was working. They were businessmen, and they were invited to ride one of the cars up to the quarry. Well, they got on the car and they were riding it up to the top of the quarry. And the newspaper story at the time said, due to some mechanical failure, the car came loose. Now this had been misinterpreted over the years as the chain broke, or this happened, or that happened. What really happened was the cars were attached to the chain by, they had a hook with a nut. The hook went through the bolster in the car, and there was a nut on the other side. And like today, I keep on hearing about fake news and this, that, and the other thing. When you're doing this type of research and you find these stories back from those days of the accident that happened, you almost got to read like 10 stories. You got to read every story you can, because some of the reporters get it right and some of them don't. Just like today, and back then it was the same thing. They left out details, and if they leave out details, that leaves it to speculation for future generations to say, well, I think this is what happened, or I think that's what happened. Well, what really happened was there was a story that I recently found, and the reporter came up here and he talked to people afterwards, and he discovered that the accident was caused by the nut coming loose on the hook on the car. So the nut for the hook was probably on by like one thread. Nobody had checked it. The thing got to the top, the nut come out, the hook pulled out, the car was disengaged from this endless chain. They're at the top, and it comes flying down the hill. Well, 3 of the guys jumped from the car someplace around here, but Tom Backus, the guy from Cuba, he was probably petrified. I guess he didn't jump. He stayed with the car. When it got to the bottom, it jumped the track and went up in the air. He landed underneath it, and he was crushed to death. The other guys that jumped, one of them, I think he broke every bone in his body, but they lived to tell the story. Well, that reporter also gave complete details of how it worked. Not only that particular detail, which I found fascinating because nobody did, but then he got into the details. He says it was told to him how it worked. He got into all these details about a 1-ton counterweight balancing a 9-ton car. Then there was on the side that was the counterweight, there was a horse sweep and a winch. So they would have had a winch with the horse, with the chain wrapped around it. That would have been the braking device. So that one horse could hold back the weight. The counterweight did most of the work, but the horse did the braking. That's how we got that little detail of that. And then he also got into the details of how long it took. And if you did the math, you found out that it took 4 minutes to go to 1,315 feet, which means these 9-ton cars were moving down this thing with 9 tons of weight, moving at about 1 foot a second, or like this, coming down this way, real slow, creeping down, all this noise.
It's just one car.
That's one car. Now, we don't know if they fastened more than one car, and they wouldn't have been the cars that you see in these photographs with the big high wheels. The cars that were on this incline would have had like these 18-inch cast iron wheels. They were heavy cars, but they would have had smaller wheels. And when they got to the bottom, we're not sure if they were hooked to horses and pulled. We don't even know what the cars look like because we don't have all those details. If they had sides on them, if they were a flat car like in this drawing. So there's a lot of details that we put into this because we wanted to get a drawing done, but we didn't have all the details.
Come to the transitions.
Yeah, the transitions. Okay, so this is what we think it would have looked like as it was originally designed, which is the most important part of the history of this thing, how it was designed by Goodley Bryant. But the Granite Railway Company, being in business from 1826 all the way up until 1942, over the years, this was a working quarry, and they transitioned. They transitioned this railway when they sold the Granite Railway to the old colony in 1870. They still had the quarry operating, but they didn't have a railway anymore. Now it was a steam train that ran down there, the old colony railroad. So what they did was they were still using this incline, but they couldn't use this gauge. This is a 5-foot gauge, and the modern railways were like 4 foot 8 inch. So all they did was they went right over the top of this and they laid these modern tracks down. These were put down around 1870, and at that time they still used a chain, but they had a steam winch at the top that the chain would have controlled for the cars coming up and down. And that continued in use all the way from 1870 up until about 1900 or so. Around 1917. It was like 1918, 1919, right after World War II. Well, there was that period of time, okay? Remember the Quincy Quarry Railroad. So from 1870 till about 1893, they would have used this with the regular standard gauge rail cars to meet the New Haven Railroad. In 1893, when they built the Quincy Quarry Railroad, they abandoned this once again. They said, well, now we don't need it because we got a railroad that comes up through the... So now the Granite Railway Company, 1918, we're still in business. What are we going to do now to get our granite out of here? They go, well, we're going to get the incline back in operation, but we're not going to use cars up and down. We're going to use the newfangled invention, these motor trucks that proved their worth in World War II. So that transition, what they did was they tore up those railroad tracks that you saw in the previous photo. They laid these channel irons down on this side, on one side, all they needed one side. So in this photograph, you can see these channel irons they laid down. They put a winch up the top of the hill with a cable now, like a regular winch, and they would have these old trucks like you see in this photograph that would drive up, and if the wheels were slipping because they were solid rubber tires, they'd hook the winch on, they'd pull them up, they'd load them with granite, and then they would drive down with the winch assist to get down here, and then they'd unhook them, and then they could drive wherever they wanted and deliver their granite to the railroad or to the stone sheds or whatever. So that was the third method that was used, and when they did that, by that period of time, it was the 1920s, the Granite Railway Company was like publishing this literature about the history and the railroad and everything. They tore up the tracks on both sides and they uncovered this side, and you can see in this photograph, they kind of uncovered this side and they preserved it. So it is in this, well, you can't see it with the snow, but there are photographs that show that side would have been preserved. And that was an operation, they used that method with that truck up until the very end.